I never thought standing up for my wife would lead to my family accusing me of humiliating them. But here I am, replaying every word in my head, wondering if I really had any other choice. It's strange how a single comment, one stupid, smug little remark, can crack something that was already fragile. Maybe that's why it feels so impossible to let go of this. The truth is, I'm not the kind of person who likes conflict. I've always been the one in the family who tries to keep the peace. My parents have strong personalities, and growing up, I learned early that sometimes it was easier to just nod along than to push back. But this time was different. This time it wasn't about me. It was about my wife, someone who's never done anything but be kind to them, no matter how cold they were in return. We've been married 5 years. In that time, Fa has gone out of her way to build bridges with my parents. She's remembered their birthdays, sent them little gifts from trips we've taken, asked after their health, offered to help whenever she could. She never complained when they were distant or when they made the occasional offhand remark about her being so different. I knew they were wary of her at first. I'd hoped, foolishly, that time would change that the longer they saw how genuine she is, how hardworking and independent, they'd eventually let go of their assumptions. But last weekend proved I'd been kidding myself. One moment, we were all sitting around the table making polite small talk. The next, my dad was smirking across the plates, leaning back in his chair, asking Fa if she was finally done pretending, now that she'd secured her green card. I can't remember the last time I was that angry. Part of me wonders if I should have handled it differently, waited until the guests were gone, tried to reason with them in private. But the other part of me still feels the same cold fury I felt that night, that no matter how hard she's tried to prove herself, they were never going to see her as anything but a foreigner who must have ulterior motives. And in that moment, I couldn't sit there and let it pass like some harmless joke. I couldn't watch her sit there, cheeks pale, eyes down, while the people who were supposed to be my family laughed about whether she loved me or just wanted a visa. So I stood up. I told them we were leaving. And now, somehow, I'm the villain in their story. I don't regret defending her. But I do wonder if I could have done it in a way that didn't set the whole house on fire. Fa and I met almost 8 years ago, when she came to the US to pursue her master's degree. I was in my mid-20s, working my first stable job out of college, still feeling like I was faking adulthood most days. We met through a mutual friend at a small gathering. I remember she was quiet at first, listening more than she spoke, her English careful but already fluent. But once she felt comfortable, she opened up with this dry sense of humor that caught me off guard. I won't pretend it was some whirlwind, movie-style romance. We took things slow. She was here on a student visa, focused on her studies, and didn't want any distractions. I was just starting to get my footing in my career. But little by little, we found ourselves spending more time together. We started out studying in coffee shops, then going to farmers markets on the weekends, cooking together. Over time, it turned into something steady and real. I think my family assumed it was a fling, just something casual that would fade when she graduated. But it didn't fade. We dated for nearly 3 years before we got engaged. When I told my parents we were planning to get married, I could see the hesitation in their eyes even before they said anything. My dad asked me, in that low, serious voice he uses when he thinks he's being wise, "Are you sure she doesn't just want citizenship?" I tried to laugh it off. I told him Fa had her own ambitions. She'd already landed a job with a respected company that agreed to sponsor her work visa. She'd never hinted that she needed me for anything, but he just shook his head and muttered something about these girls and how you never really know their intentions. It was the first time I felt a sharp distance open between us. A realization that maybe my parents weren't as open-minded as I'd always believed. After we got married, it didn't get better. Fa tried. God, she tried so hard. She learned to cook a few of my mom's recipes, brought over Thai dishes she thought they'd like, offered to help set the table every time we visited. She never lost her patience when they asked patronizing questions about her family back home or made jokes about how exotic she was. I knew it hurt her sometimes. I could see it in the way she'd press her lips together and keep her eyes on her plate. But she never complained to them. She always said she didn't want to cause problems between me and my family, that it was better to be patient, to give them time to come around. And for a while I thought maybe that was working. After the first year or two, some of the most blatant comments stopped. My mom even complimented her cooking a few times, which felt like a small victory. I started to think maybe the worst was behind us. But underneath that surface civility, I think they never really let go of the idea that she must have an agenda. Whenever Fah got a promotion or a raise, my dad would make these offhand remarks like, "Must be nice, marrying into a country with more opportunities." Or he'd ask her if she was sending money home, as though she were funneling my income to some shadowy operation abroad. It didn't matter how many times I explained she had her own career, her own bank account, her own goals. It didn't matter that she earned more than I did and never once asked me to pay her bills. In their minds, she was always going to be the outsider who'd somehow manipulated her way into a more comfortable life. I wish I could say I always stood up for her. But if I'm honest, sometimes I let those comments slide because I was tired, or embarrassed, or didn't want to start another argument. It's one of the things I regret most now. Because the truth is, all that quiet resentment doesn't disappear. It just builds up in the spaces between polite dinners and forced small talk, waiting for the moment it can come spilling out. Last weekend was supposed to be a simple family dinner. My parents invited us over along with my brother, his wife, and my uncle and aunt who were visiting. I knew it might be awkward, extended family always brought more questions, but I told Fah it would be fine. I promised her they'd gotten better. I really believed that, or maybe I just wanted to. The night of the dinner, I remember feeling almost hopeful. Fah had spent the afternoon cooking a dish she knew my mom liked, chicken sauté with peanut sauce, and brought it in a glass casserole dish, wrapped carefully in a towel so it would stay warm. She wore one of her nice dresses, the dark blue one she saves for occasions when she wants to look polished but not flashy. When we walked in, everyone seemed in good spirits. My mom greeted us with a tight smile. My dad nodded, already settled into his recliner with a beer in hand. My brother and his wife were there too, chatting with my aunt and uncle in the dining room. For the first half hour or so, everything felt almost normal. We made small talk. Fah complimented my aunt's earrings. My mom made polite comments about work. I started to relax. I let myself believe that maybe we were finally past the phase where every interaction felt like a test she had to pass. Dinner was supposed to start at 6, but my dad insisted on having one more drink before everyone sat down. He poured himself another beer and started asking my uncle about his retirement plans. The conversation drifted from taxes to the cost of living to politics, safe, impersonal topics. At some point, my dad turned back toward Fah. He had that look on his face, the smirk I'd learned to dread. "So, Fah," he drawled, leaning back in his chair. "Now that you've been married 5 years, is this when you finally get to keep your green card for good?" The whole table went quiet. I felt my stomach drop. Fah's smile faltered. She looked down at her hands, her fingers twisting together under the tablecloth. I opened my mouth to say something, but before I could, my mom chimed in. "Well, it's a fair question," she said lightly, glancing around as if expecting everyone to agree. "You can't blame us for wondering how much of this was about love, and how much was, practical." My uncle shifted uncomfortably. My brother's wife shot me a wide-eyed look. Fah's face had gone pale. She didn't say a word. I could feel the heat rising up my neck. "Dad," I said, my voice low, "you need to stop." "Oh, come on," he said, waving his hand. "Don't be so sensitive. It's just a joke." "It's not a joke," I snapped. "It's insulting." My mom raised her eyebrows. "We're not trying to insult anyone, but you can't expect us not to have questions. It's a big cultural difference, and you were always naive about these things." Felt like my chest was about to explode. "I've been married to Fah for 5 years," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. "You've known her for almost 8. She's never done anything but be kind to you. She has her own career. She doesn't need me, or you, for anything. And you still sit here implying she's some kind of opportunist." My dad shrugged. "Well, I'm sorry if you don't like it, but that's how a lot of people see it. Doesn't mean it's not true." I looked at Fah. She still hadn't lifted her head. Her shoulders were tense. Her jaw clenched so hard I could see the muscles twitching. I don't know what finally snapped in me. Maybe it was the years of little comments that I'd ignored. Maybe it was the fact that I'd promised her this dinner would be okay, that they'd changed. But in that moment, I knew I couldn't sit there and let them keep treating her like this. I pushed back my chair. The legs scraped loudly against the tile. "We're leaving," I said. My mom's eyes went wide. "Don't be ridiculous." "No," I said. "I'm done. You don't get to talk about my wife like she's some stereotype you read about on the internet. You don't get to humiliate her in front of everyone and then pretend it's a joke." Fah finally looked up at me. Her eyes were bright with unshed tears. I reached for her hand. "Let's go." Nobody tried to stop us. My brother looked like he wanted to say something but didn't. My aunt and uncle were frozen in awkward silence. I didn't look back as we walked out the door. In the car, Fah was silent. She didn't cry, not right away. She just stared out the window, her hands still clenched in mine. When we were halfway home, she spoke, her voice small and flat. "Do they really think I married you for a green card?" I felt something in my chest crack. "No," I said hoarsely. "They're ignorant. That's all." But in my heart, I knew it wasn't just ignorance. It was the prejudice they'd never bothered to let go of. And I wasn't sure if I could ever forgive them for showing it so plainly. The rest of the drive home felt longer than any trip I can remember. I kept glancing over at Fah, hoping she'd say something, anything, to let me know what she was feeling, but she didn't. She sat very still, one hand resting in her lap, the other pressed to the side of her face like she was trying to hold herself together. I tried to find the words to fix it. "I'm so sorry," I said at one point, my voice low. "I swear to you I didn't know that they'd say something like that." She didn't answer right away. After a moment, she exhaled shakily and turned to look at me. Her eyes were red. "It's not the first time," she whispered. I knew what she meant. All the little digs. All the suspicious questions. All the times they'd acted like she was some outsider trying to work an angle. But hearing her say it so plainly broke something in me. I pulled into our driveway and turned off the engine. We sat in the dark for a minute, listening to the engine tick as it cooled. Finally, she spoke again. "I thought, maybe after this long, they'd see me differently," she said, her voice trembling. "That they'd know I love you. That it's not about where I'm from." I swallowed, my throat tight. "They're wrong," I said. "And you don't have to prove anything to them." She shook her head, blinking back tears. "It still hurts," she whispered. I reached for her hand. She let me hold it, but her grip was limp, exhausted. That night, after we went inside, she didn't say much more. She went straight to the bedroom, changed into her pajamas, and lay down facing the wall. I sat alone in the living room, staring at the dark TV screen, replaying every second of that dinner. I thought about how many times I'd let things slide because I didn't want to make it a big deal. About how I'd told myself that biting my tongue was the mature thing to do. I'd convinced myself that eventually, if we just waited long enough, my parents would change. But watching Fah's face as my dad made that comment, watching her sit there trying not to cry in front of my entire family, I realized how much my silence had cost her. I'd been so afraid of confrontation that I let her carry the burden alone. That was the part that made me feel sick with shame. I knew in that moment that I couldn't keep pretending anymore. So I made a decision. I wasn't going to apologize for walking out. I wasn't going to smooth it over just to avoid the awkwardness. I was done pretending my parents' jokes were harmless. The next morning, my phone started lighting up with messages. My mom sent a long text about how embarrassed she was, how I'd humiliated them in front of the family. My dad texted something shorter. "Overreacted. Should have handled this privately." My brother called to say he thought I'd made it worse by confronting them in front of everyone. That I should have just waited until dinner was over, then spoken to them in private. But the more I thought about it, the less I believed that. Because it wasn't private. They chose to say those things in front of an audience. They chose to humiliate my wife publicly. So why was it my job to pretend it hadn't happened? I typed out a reply to my mom. You embarrassed yourselves. You owe Fah an apology. I'm not discussing this further until you're willing to take responsibility. I didn't hit send right away. My thumb hovered over the screen, my heart hammering. I knew that message would probably make things worse in the short term. But in that moment, I finally understood something I should have realized years ago. Protecting my wife mattered more than protecting their feelings. And if that meant a rift, then so be it. It didn't take long for my message to blow up into something bigger than I'd even anticipated. I hit send that morning, hands shaking a little, and then turned off my phone for a couple of hours because I couldn't stand to watch the read receipts pop up in real time. When I finally turned it back on, I had a flurry of missed calls and texts. My mom's first message was short and clipped. I don't think you understand how disrespectful that was. Followed by a longer one. We have always tried to be welcoming to Fah, but you seem determined to see us as villains. What happened to giving people the benefit of the doubt? We were joking, and you turned it into an attack. My dad's text was even more dismissive. Grow up. You're being dramatic. My brother called me that night. He sounded tired, like he'd been dragged into something he wanted no part of. Look, he began. I know Mom and Dad can be insensitive, but you really think storming out was the right move? You couldn't just wait until the guests left. I pressed the phone to my ear and tried to stay calm. They weren't joking, I said. They've been saying the same thing in different ways for years. It wasn't some one-off comment. I get that, he said carefully. But you know what they're like. They're never going to admit they crossed a line. That doesn't mean we have to pretend they didn't. I snapped. There was a pause. I just think you could have handled it more privately, he said finally. I almost laughed. Privately. Like my dad hadn't decided to say it in front of the entire family, in front of my aunt and uncle, like it was some funny anecdote everyone would enjoy. They made it public, I said quietly. Not me. After that, he didn't have much else to say. The next day, my aunt called Fah directly. I wasn't in the room when she picked up, but I could hear Fah's voice in the kitchen, quiet and hesitant. Later, she told me my aunt apologized. Not for what was said, but for the awkwardness. She said she hoped we could all just move on. Fah told me, her eyes tired. I wished I could give her that. I wished I could erase the way she'd looked that night. Small, humiliated. Like she'd been caught doing something shameful when all she'd done was show up and try to belong. For a few days, it felt like everything was in limbo. No one apologized. No one tried to have a real conversation. Just a lot of texts from my mom about how I'd overreacted. And a few carefully worded messages from my brother asking if I'd reconsider talking things through like adults. Fah didn't say much about any of it. She kept to herself, going through the motions of work and chores, but I could tell she was still thinking about it. One evening, we were sitting on the couch when she turned to me suddenly. Do you regret it? She asked. Her voice was very soft. Regret what? I said. Walking out, she whispered. Standing up to them. I didn't even have to think about it. No, I said. I don't regret it. She looked down, twisting the edge of her sleeve between her fingers. It's just, I never wanted to be the reason you fought with your family, she said. I know they're important to you. You're important to me, I said. More than anything. Her eyes filled, and she leaned against me, pressing her face into my shoulder. I think that was when I realized how much she'd been carrying all this time, how many times she'd probably wondered if she was the problem, if she just wasn't good enough for them. After that night, I felt something settle in me, a conviction I hadn't had before. If defending her meant my parents thought I was ungrateful or dramatic or disrespectful, then so be it. Because what would it say about me if I couldn't even protect my own wife from their ignorance? And the truth is, part of me was tired of pretending they were better than this. Maybe they'd never change. Maybe they'd never really see Fah as more than the foreign wife. But that didn't mean I had to sit quietly and let them chip away at her dignity. In the following weeks, my parents kept up their stance. They refused to apologize, insisting that everything was just a misunderstanding. My mom finally sent one last message. I'm sorry you feel that way. It wasn't an apology. It was just a way to end the conversation. I haven't replied yet. Part of me knows that eventually we'll have to figure out how to coexist again. Family obligations don't disappear overnight. But for now, I'm okay with the distance. Because for the first time in a long time, I feel like I did something right. Now that some time has passed, I keep replaying everything in my head and wondering if I could have handled it differently. Part of me knows walking out was probably the most dramatic thing I've ever done in front of my family. I can see why, to them, it felt like an overreaction. Maybe if you didn't know the history, if you just heard that one comment, you'd think I was too sensitive. But it wasn't just that one comment. It was years of little digs, side-eye, and suspicion. Years of Fah trying so hard to prove she wasn't what they assumed, only to be humiliated in front of everyone. I keep thinking about how she looked when my dad made that joke, like she was trying to disappear into her chair, and how she asked me afterward, so quietly, if they'd ever really believed she loved me. The worst part is I don't think they ever have. I'm not sure what comes next. My parents still refuse to apologize, and I don't feel ready to pretend everything is fine. My brother keeps telling me to just let it go, for the sake of family harmony. But every time I think about that night, I feel this hard knot of anger in my chest. I don't regret standing up for my wife. I'd do it again. But part of me wonders if I should have waited until we were alone. Maybe pulled my parents aside later instead of confronting them in front of everyone. Maybe then they wouldn't be so defensive. At the same time, I feel like if I'd stayed silent, I'd be telling Fah she had to just sit there and take it. So Reddit, AITA for walking out of my parents' dinner after they accused my wife of marrying me for a green card. Even if it embarrassed them in front of the whole family?